Hello, my name is Jason Weatherald. I'm a lung specialist and researcher at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada. It is my pleasure to speak to you today about new treatments for pulmonary hypertension, clinical trials, and drugs that are in development. So first off, what are clinical trials? This is a specific type of research study in which one or more participants is prospectively assigned to receive one or more interventions. We then test the effect of this intervention on a health-related or behavioral outcome. Interventions include, but are not limited to, drugs, vaccines, cells, interventional procedures, devices, natural health products, and even interventions like physiotherapy. Conceptually, we can think of any population of people with a health condition of interest in which to study, and they can be randomly assigned to receive either a new treatment, shown here in black, or a placebo or fake version of that treatment, or even the standard of care medical therapy. Participants in this trial would then be followed for a period of time, and then we would measure the outcomes of interest, such as quality of life, or heart function, or survival. It is only at this time that we look at the data collected in the trial to determine, does it work compared to the existing standard of care or a placebo? The clinical trial spectrum is long and starts with exploratory or preclinical research. In this type of research, researchers are working to identify promising medical therapies that might work in a condition of interest. In phase 1 clinical trials, we are testing whether the medicine or intervention is safe in healthy volunteers. We're trying to determine what might be a safe and well-tolerated dose. Are there any potential concerning side effects? Then, a medication will go into phase 2 clinical trials. In a phase 2 trial, we're trying to determine how well does the medication or the intervention work in people with the condition under study, such as pulmonary hypertension. We're trying to determine what are the common side effects and what is the safest and most effective dose. After phase 2, an intervention will be tested in phase 3, which is usually a much larger population of people with the disease of interest. In a phase 3 trial, we aim to determine how well does the medication or intervention work in people with the condition of interest. What are the side effects? Does it work better than the standard of care or a placebo? A phase 3 trial is typically required in order for a new medication or treatment to be approved and integrated into the standard clinical care of a disease. Research doesn't stop after phase 3, however. We're increasingly performing phase 4 clinical trials, and these study the medication or the intervention after it is approved and are useful to determine how well a treatment works in the real world and can help determine whether there are rare but potentially important adverse events. So why do we need clinical trials at all? They are really the only effective way to determine whether a new intervention is safe, whether it's effective, and are the only way to really advance our knowledge about how to treat medical conditions. They're also important to determine whether there are any groups of people with a condition of interest that benefit most, or potentially groups of people with a condition of interest who do not benefit from a treatment. So, what are the new treatments for pulmonary arterial hypertension, or PAH, and what are the potential targets that we could develop new treatments for? The development of PAH is complex, but one of the mechanisms is constriction of blood vessels in the lung. So, therapies that aim to block that constriction or dilate blood vessels can help lower the blood pressure in the lungs and potentially improve patients' symptoms and outcomes. This is the mechanism through which most of our existing treatments work. However, we know that in PAH, there's a lot of abnormalities of the blood vessels. Here you can see a cross-section of a normal lung artery, which has a large internal area that makes it easy for blood to flow, compared to an artery in someone with PAH, in which there is overgrowth of the muscle cells and a very narrow inner channel that makes it harder for blood to flow. The development of PAH involves many complex mechanisms, including abnormal proliferation of muscle cells and scar tissue cells around the arteries, inflammation, ultimately leading to what we call adverse or abnormal remodeling of pulmonary blood vessels. Additionally, there's a loss of blood vessels in many types of pulmonary hypertension. So, new treatments that help restore the normal function of blood vessels in the lungs are attractive targets for new treatments. This may include drugs that work through anti-proliferation, anti-inflammation, and have reverse remodeling effects, as well as those that lead to new blood vessel growth in the lungs. In PAH, it's important to not forget the right side of the heart. The right ventricle is the chamber of the heart that pumps blood into the lungs. Treatments that could help improve the function or ability of the right side of the heart to pump blood may help improve symptoms and prolong life for people with PAH. So what new treatments are on the horizon for PAH? This cartoon from a recent article shows some of the medications that are currently in phase 2 and phase 3 trials. While this looks complex, there are several different mechanisms that have been explored, including targeting abnormal cell proliferation, improving existing therapies, such as using inhaled versions of medications or medications that are taken less frequently. There are new medications as well that target other growth pathways that might help reverse the abnormal blood vessel pathology that we see in patients with PAH. The first medication I wanted to discuss was sotatercept. Sotatercept is a new medication that is an antibody-like drug that binds special molecules called activins that trigger abnormal proliferation of blood vessel cells in the lungs. Sotatercept aims to restore the balance between pro-proliferation and anti-proliferation factors, which ultimately is thought to lead to reverse remodeling of the disease in arteries in people with PAH. Sotatercept was recently studied in a large phase 3 trial of people with PAH called the STELLAR trial. Sotatercept was recently approved in the United States by the FDA as a treatment for PAH and is now available for patients in the US, but importantly, is not yet available in Europe or Canada. This is a summary of what we found out in the STELLAR trial. So in the STELLAR trial, patients with PAH were randomly assigned to receive injections of sotatercept every 3 weeks or a placebo injection. After being followed up, we found that patients receiving sotatercept were able to walk 40 meters farther on their 6-minute walking distance. Importantly, this is more than what we call the minimal clinically relevant increase in 6-minute walking distance, which is about 30 to 33 meters. What that means is that this improvement in 6-minute walk distance is clinically meaningful. Sotatercept also came with an 84% reduction in the risk of death or clinical worsening. It's important to highlight that there were also side effects and adverse reactions. Serious adverse events occurred in 14% of participants in this trial. 1.8% of patients discontinued sotatercept. The most common adverse effects included bleeding, which was most commonly not serious, such as nosebleeds, and 10% of patients developed things called telangiectasias, which are abnormal blood vessel growths seen on the skin. Although sotatercept and the STELLAR trial is a major advance in the treatment of PAH, there are many unanswered questions about sotatercept and how it will be used in practice. We still do not know, will the effect of sotatercept wear off over time? Are there rare or other unknown long-term side effects? Patients in STELLAR were generally several years after their PAH diagnosis, and they were not the most severe type of patients with PAH, so we don't know yet whether sotatercept works in the most severe patients, in patients who have a high number of other medical conditions, or in those patients who are more recently diagnosed. But ongoing studies hope to answer some of these questions. We also do not yet know whether sotatercept works in other types of pulmonary hypertension, such as PH due to left heart disease or lung disease. We also don't know if and when it is safe for patients who have responded to sotatercept to stop their background pulmonary arterial hypertension medications. The next new treatment I wanted to discuss is inhaled imatinib. Imatinib is a drug developed several decades ago for the treatment of a specific type of blood cancer called CML. Imatinib works through many mechanisms, but ultimately may have some benefits in PAH due to its effects on growth signals that could help stop the abnormal proliferation of blood vessel cells in the wall of pulmonary arteries. Imatinib has already been studied in PAH. In fact, an oral version of this medication was tested in a clinical trial called IMPRESS. And while there were some signals that imatinib may be beneficial in people with PAH, it had many side effects, including several important and severe side effects that precluded its use in clinical practice. Over subsequent years, several pharmaceutical companies have worked on developing a way to deliver imatinib in an inhaled version. An inhaled drug goes in through the mouth, into the trachea, and can be deposited into the bronchial tubes, which lie very close to the small blood vessels in the lungs where PAH is affecting them. Therefore, the medication can be delivered through the lungs to the cells that need it most. Compared to oral administration of a medication, there are several advantages to considering the inhaled route. When we take an oral medication by mouth, it goes into the stomach and the gastrointestinal tract, where it's then absorbed into the bloodstream, often metabolized by the liver, and then back into the bloodstream where it has its effects in the lungs, but also in other parts of the body. It is these effects that can lead to many of the adverse reactions or side effects that drugs have. By repackaging a medication in an inhaled form, the thought is that we get direct delivery to the lungs and we avoid the absorption by the gastrointestinal tract into the bloodstream directly. This could help avoid some of the toxicities or bad side effects related to medications. Inhaled imatinib has already finished one phase 2 clinical trial, although the results are not yet available. In this phase 2 trial, patients were randomly assigned to receive a placebo or 3 different doses of inhaled imatinib. The most promising and best tolerated dose will be carried forward into a phase 3 clinical trial, which is now ongoing. Another medication that targets the abnormal growth of cells in the lungs of people with PAH is called seralutinib. Seralutinib is also an inhaled therapy and has recently been tested in a phase 2 trial called the TORREY study. In this trial, 86 patients were randomly assigned to inhaled seralutinib or a placebo. 91% of the participants in this trial were female, and they did show that there was a 14% reduction in something called the PVR, or the pulmonary vascular resistance, which is an important marker of PAH severity that's measured by a right heart catheterization. There was a small increase, but what is considered not clinically or statistically significant in the 6-minute walk distance test. In some exploratory studies, they also showed that inhaled seralutinib may improve the appearance of blood vessels on a special type of CT scan, suggesting that it could have some effects on reverse remodeling of the blood vessels in the lungs. Seralutinib is now being studied in a larger phase 3 trial. Next, I wanted to discuss some non-medical interventions for pulmonary hypertension. The ARIA device is a novel, implantable, gas-filled balloon that is put in through a catheter and sits in the main pulmonary artery that connects the heart to the lungs. It works by helping to alleviate the excessive workload on the right side of the heart that happens in patients with pulmonary hypertension. This device is designed to restore some of the benefits of a healthy pulmonary artery, reducing the workload of the heart and improving blood flow into the lungs. It does not have any battery, pump, or electronics and uses the normal motion of the heart to inflate and deflate the balloon to improve blood flow in the lungs. The ARIA device has recently been studied in small clinical trials of patients with pulmonary hypertension that showed some improvements in measures of hemodynamics or pressure and flow in the lungs. and will likely proceed into larger studies to determine whether it is safe and effective. Another interesting therapy is something called pulmonary artery denervation. Within the chest, the heart and the lungs are connected to many different nerves. These nerves help regulate things like heart rate, but also blood vessel tone, or the degree to which the blood vessels are constricting or dilating in the lungs. We know that in PAH and other types of PH, there is overdrive of these nerves to the lung blood circulation. And if we interfere with this, it could help result in blood vessel dilation and improve blood flow in the lungs. Pulmonary artery denervation is a catheter-based intervention by which a plastic catheter is inserted through a vein that leads into the heart and the lungs, much like a right heart catheterization. A special probe at the tip delivers a type of energy that can help to ablate or destroy some of these nerve cells that travel along the walls of the artery in the lung. Pulmonary artery denervation has been studied now in several clinical trials. This is one of the most recent and largest clinical trials in which over 120 patients were randomly assigned to receive the pulmonary artery denervation procedure or a sham procedure plus pulmonary hypertension drugs. In the bottom, you can see that patients who received pulmonary arterial denervation had a 61-meter increase in their 6-minute walking distance compared to only 18 meters of increase in the sham group. There were also other improvements, including markers of how stressed out the right side of the heart was and other hemodynamic variables such as the pulmonary vascular resistance. There are several larger and ongoing clinical trials investigating the effectiveness and safety of pulmonary artery denervation. Another common question that patients ask is, what about stem cells? Well, there have been several small pilot studies evaluating different types of stem cell therapies for PAH. The SAPPHIRE trial was recently completed but has not yet been published. In the SAPPHIRE trial, patients gave a blood sample and then researchers isolated specific types of stem cells called endothelial progenitor cells. These cells were then modified in the laboratory to produce larger amounts of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a very potent blood vessel dilator. Then these cells are reinfused into the same patient, and patients were studied at baseline and at follow-up after several infusions of these stem cells. Again, this is experimental and has not yet been shown to be effective in PAH, but is an interesting and potentially promising new approach. So what about clinical trials in other types of pulmonary hypertension? The two most common types of pulmonary hypertension are those due to left heart disease and lung disease. There are several ongoing clinical trials for pulmonary hypertension due to left heart failure, including the Cadence study, which will evaluate the effectiveness of sotatercept in a phase 2 trial of patients with left heart failure and pulmonary hypertension. There are also clinical studies evaluating pulmonary arterial denervation in this population, and another phase 2 study ongoing of a molecule called AZD3427, which is a derivative of a hormone called relaxin. This study will aim to determine whether this has any beneficial effects on this type of pulmonary hypertension. And finally, there are several ongoing clinical trials of PH due to lung disease, including patients with interstitial lung disease, sarcoidosis, and COPD. In summary, clinical trials are the only way we can determine whether new treatments for PH actually work. There are many ongoing clinical trials in PAH that are aiming to improve upon our existing treatments that target blood vessel dilation in the lung. There are other treatments that aim to reverse the abnormal thickening of obstructed blood vessels. There are also therapies, including denervation, that target the abnormal function of the nervous system as it connects to the heart and lungs. Other devices, such as the ARIA device, may be interesting to improve the function of the right side of the heart and its connection to the lung. And importantly, there are several ongoing clinical trials that target other types of pulmonary hypertension that are more common than PAH, such as PH due to lung or left heart disease.